Well, let's get started. My name is Bob Mueller, and I'm with the Foundation for Restoration of St. Genevieve, and I do history, a little history here in St. Genevieve. And I'm going to talk today about some of our French Christmas customs and some of our German Christmas customs, because we're kind of a mixed breed here. We're probably more German now than we are French, and in fact most of the Christmas traditions in America are more German than French, and we'll talk about that. So first thing we're going to talk about is the French, since they were here first. St. Nicholas, and yesterday was the Fête de Saint Nicolas, and it's in France, in Canada, and here Father Christmas was Père Noël, Father Père, and he always had a little donkey with him to carry the presents. Anybody know who the donkey's name is? It's Guy. And you've all heard of Guy. Well, the Guy means mistletoe. So Santa's donkey is mistletoe. And also Santa has a helper that comes along with him to keep all the children straight. And his name is Père Fouettard. And he's always, I found a couple of images of him. He usually has a bag of sticks. I guess they didn't have coal in France, so sticks were the thing to do. The other one, and I'm going to mix some traditional French and then some local things. This is one of the things that happens now. In fact, it was this afternoon at 3:30, the procession of the White Lily over at Immaculate Conception on the island of Kaskaskia. And the legend is it was in wintertime. They were going to have a feast day for Mary, and they were all the women were supposed to bring stuff to church. And this poor Illinois Indian lady did not have anything, and on the way to church, she finds this white lily growing. And so she takes, it's like a miracle. This is like December, January, so she takes it to the church, and this was written down, legends in the Illinois family, or culture, and they still celebrate that today. And they have a procession of only women, and they carry up white lilies. They're probably right in the middle of it, and they sing it in the Illinois language. So it's really a moving little thing. It's kind of interesting. I found a similar legend in Germany of a white flower in winter. One of the things, if you've been over to Felix Valley, you saw that they have a little creche scene, a little manger scene. Typically in France, more in the area of Provence, southern France, they have, we typically have Jesus and Mary and Joseph and the wise men and the angels and the shepherds. Well, in France, they have things called santo, or saints. And they're not only just saints like we think of saints, like the three wise men and some of the other James and John. That's actually you'll see that they'll have, like, here's a blacksmith. This is a very Alsatian-looking couple. This guy's he might be making shingles or something. So you're going to get not only just the religious part of it, you're going to get the townspeople in the creche scene. Now, there's always legends about Christmas. And one of them, the earth, for the French, the earth was going to open up on Christmas Eve, and you're going to get all these treasures. And farm animals are supposed to give the gift of speech right at 12 o'clock on Christmas Eve. But if you go try to hear it, and you listen in, you're going to be deaf for a year, or dumb. I think I must have listened a few times. Farm cattle kneel at stroke of midnight. The dead rise from the graves and gather at the cemetery cross for Mass. Now, in our cemetery, our old cemetery, there's no priest buried, so I don't know what they do. They probably... And then there's the old famous, which is really a Canadian legend that came down here. It's called Le Chasse Galerie, the flying canoe. And that was a legend that these French Canadians, they were out way away from home, and they are cutting wood out in the forest and everything. And they wanted to be home for Christmas to New Year's. That is the season. So they make a pact with the devil. Oh, God. And the devil says, I'll fly you back in the flying canoe, and you can have all the fun you want, but you have to be here at the stroke of midnight on January 1st. And if you say the name of God, you will crash. So They go home, they party, they're drinking. St. Sylvester's New Year's Eve, and so they get in the canoe, and they're flying back, and one of the guys sobers up, and he looks down, and he goes, "Mon Dieu, we're high," and they crash. So that's the legend of the flying canoe. One of the things when I think if you went over to Felix Valley, the children would put out carrots for ghee, actually, for the donkey, and you see the wooden shoes that the French would wear here in the wintertime when it was snowy or rainy. One of the other great traditions here is called Midnight Mass, and it's been going on for a long, long time. La Messe, please excuse my French. That's not one of my native languages or even close, but La Messe de Minuit. And the whole family, unless there were real little kids, would go to church on Christmas Eve at midnight. And one of the great treasures we have here is there was a young boy sent here in around 1793. He was 7 years old. His father lived in Pittsburgh, and he sent his son down the Ohio, up the Mississippi, and he came here to learn French. His name was Henry Marie Brackenridge, and lucky for us, he wrote about coming here, the house that he lived in, which is still here. It's one of the 3 vertical log post in the ground houses. And he wrote about going to church at midnight mass. He was not Catholic. In the book it says the priest baptized him, but there's nothing in the baptismal records to verify that. And the legend is that Mrs. St. Jean de Beauvais would not let her sleep with her other children unless he got baptized. But he becomes an altar boy, of all things. And he talked about walking up from the Vital St. Jean Beauvais house down the street here, up to the church, all by himself, like an hour before midnight mass. And he sat there and he just reflected on everything. He said that the townspeople would get the biggest candles in the whole village to light up the church. So it was a very, very special time, and around here in the early days, there weren't priests in every town. There wasn't one in St. Louis. The priests from here would go all the way from St. Louis down to almost down into Arkansas at times. And so there was one of the guys, priest wrote, I think it was Father Didier in St. Louis. He said it was midnight mass. It was so cold, but the parishioners still came out because they hadn't seen a priest or had the sacraments for a long time. Well, I kind of mentioned Henry Brackenridge, and in the days when Henry was here for about 3 years, and he learned French, even won a contest to speak French, and his prize was a set of teacups. They obviously thought one of the girls was going to win. But Henry, he gave it to the youngest daughter of Vital St. Jean Beauvais, Zozo. We call her Zozo, or Zuzu. And so this is about 1797. He's gone. He comes back in 1811, and he sneaks into town. He stays at the Green Tree, and the next day he goes over to the Vital St. Jean Beauvais house, and he knocks on the door, and it's Zuzu's wedding day. And Mrs. Beauvais comes to the door, and she doesn't recognize him at first. And finally says, la petite Anglaise, the little English boy. And Zuzu involved him in the wedding that day and everything. It was really it's a great story, and it's how he wrote about some of the food, how they dressed. I mean, it's just a great, great resource. Our first church, when Henry was here, would be a wooden church, very similar to what's over at Cahokia, Holy Family. Mm-hmm. So the French, we were Catholic. We were Catholic when we were French, we were Catholic when we were Spanish, and we were Catholic again when we went back to France in 1800. So they went to Mass a lot. They would go at midnight Mass, and then they would go the next morning and some of the early things. And one of the things that they would do is, they'd set up a crèche scene, and the children would bring food up to the scene for the Christ child. And one of the other traditions was to take 3 candles and soften them and mold them together, which is a symbol of the Trinity, which is in the birth of Jesus is the third part of that. One of the other things is called the pain béni, and Breckenridge even writes about this. And what would happen was one of the ladies of the village would bake a special loaf of bread, and they would take it to church, and the priest would bless it, and then all the parishioners would take a piece home for the rest of the family that couldn't be there. Well, we had this one contentious priest, Father Hilaire de Genevieve. He was a rascal. And one of the ladies baked the pain béni one year, and he refused to bless it. Well, there was a lot of other things he did. He tore down the rectory, he tore down a fence by the church. He did a lot of things. He was not one of our favorite priests. So we know that happened here in St. Genevieve, this pain béni. It's not a custom that we do anymore. I kind of wish we kind of would bring some of that back. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Chant de Noël. You know, music at Christmas is always a big thing. In French, Noël is Christmas. The first one is called Il est né le divin enfant, and it's one that we still sing at midnight mass in French. Well, if you saw the parade today, they were singing this song a number of times. Well, this is how they sing it in French. This is Upper Louisiana fiddle music, Dennis Stromat, and it goes on a little bit. I want to show you the difference here. He's got a big intro. Yeah, so I always say, Dennis can to make a Christmas song, probably a funeral song too, sound like a dance song. So this is one you're going to recognize the tune. Angels we have heard on high. And so Shepherds in the Field. Now, I always say that you can take an English song and then have it sung in French, and it's prettier. That's from 100% German, I'm telling you. The other ones, Bring a Torch, Isabel. So this is another one. This is sung by a children's choir in Thann, France, and it's called Du Bientôt Bergère, and it's very ponderous but melodic. You can imagine this in like the Strasbourg Cathedral or a Chartres, this being sung. The French love to dance, they love to sing, they love to tell stories, they love to drink wine. Yeah. They sang it a couple of times today when they were doing it, not in this version. So one of the things after midnight mass, they would go back to their houses and they would have something called le réveillon. It's called the awakening, and so Christ is being born that day, and this is what they celebrated today over at Felix Valley, and it was a lot of food and parties that would go on for a long time. Some very traditional things they would do is, I think if you were there, you saw candles in the window, and that was to welcome Mary if she came by and was looking for an inn to have the Christ child. So one of the traditions is food. The French love their food, so they would have the repast of the Réveillon. Some of the things that they would have in France we didn't have here, but some of the things they didn't have or in France, but we do things like turkey, dinde. But they would also have a tortillère, which is a very nice pork pie. That also comes from Canada, love tortillère. Boudin noir, which is black pudding, blood sausage. And cheese and bread. We don't see a lot of cheese being referenced, but we know the French love their bread. I mean, that was the thing here. We were the bread basket for all of Louisiana. We were Upper Louisiana, Lower Louisiana. We would ship 20,000 livres of flour at one time down to New Orleans. One of the other things, if you were there, you saw something called the 13 desserts, very traditional for the Le Réveillon. Sugar cookies, pain d'épices, French gingerbread. It doesn't look like ours, but it's very tasty. And a syrup cake, apple pie, madeleines. I didn't see those over there today. Were they on the corner table? Yeah. And then there's the croquembouche. That's little puff pastries, not puff pastries. What do you call those? I don't know. My brain's good.
They're soft, but they're crunchy.
And they got a center, and then they spin sugar on them.
Yeah.
And the other one's croquis, which is, everybody has a fried dough, like a donut. And then something that they had here was the black walnut pie, a tart. Now, the French didn't really like our walnuts. They thought they tasted terrible and bitter. And then they'd have like a pie made with dried fruit. We don't do that anymore. I mean, we used to have it on Thanksgiving. We'd always have I can't even remember the name of it, but it was a mincemeat pie. Yeah. And then a pound cake, sugared pecans, and here in St. Genevieve we have native pecans. They're very small, but they are very tasty. My wife makes a pecan pie, and everybody says, where'd you get this recipe? And she finally says, off the Carol syrup bottle. Where do you get your pie crust? At the grocery store. But you got to make it with St. Genevieve pecans. And the other thing is just dried fruit. The French here, we know they drew apples, pears, quinces, cherries. Every garden had an apple tree and a pear tree in it. We used to have down in front of the Vital St. Jean Beauvais house a pear tree that was there for 100 years. I love pears. There was a lady that lived next to my grandma's, and I used to go over there and steal pears, and it was a lifelong love of pears. So how many desserts do we have here? 13. Somebody must be doing the new math. So there's 12 there. So there's always La Bûche de Noël. And that kind of gets back to the Yule log of the English tradition. I think there was one here, enslaved people. There was a time period where when you lit the Yule log, they didn't have to work till the Yule log burnt away. So guess what they went and got? Green, big green Yule logs. One of the other Christmas traditions, and actually it went a lot longer than that, is something called bouillon. Now, bouillon's two things. It's something to eat, and it's a party. And so if you get invited to a bouillon, you're gonna have a good time. So what you do is you get an old hen, preferably from your neighbor.
Preferably without asking.
Without asking, yeah.
Because it tastes better.
It tastes better, and that was a custom here. I see things in the newspaper. It's bouillon times, protect your chickens. There was a law passed that said you couldn't steal chickens at night. So the guys here at the newspaper said, well, I guess we're going to have to steal them in the daytime. And it's proper etiquette. You have to invite your neighbor where you got the chicken from to the bouillon. And he has a role, or she has a role to play, and they're supposed to say, this is the best bouillon I've ever had. So you take this old hen and you put it in a pot, and you start throwing in onions and cabbage. You got to have a turnip, different things, and you cook it up, and then you strain it out, and you serve the broth. Now, in our family, my one aunt made bouillon clear. Another aunt, or my uncle, made it with tomato juice. I've had it both ways. And then we used to serve it in restaurants here, tomato bouillon. So you'd serve the broth first, and then you serve the vegetables and chicken. But it's one of the French dishes that the Germans adopted. I mean, I grew up in a completely German background, and bouillon was a favorite thing. And we still make it at Christmas time. In fact, we're going to have a batch tonight at a party after this. So the French, from Christmas through Epiphany, was called the time of the festivals, le temps de fête. And it was a great partying time. There was a guy that came through in the 1790s, and he was going upriver, but he came through St. Genevieve. He said the whole town was aglow with gaiety for the whole week. So the French did know how to party. We Germans, we kind of took a little bit of that joie de vivre away.
Not too much.
But one of our great traditions that we still do here is called La Guillenée, and it's in Europe, and on the French, New Year's Eve is called the Feast of Saint Sylvester. And this was a custom that they think comes from the Druids to Canada to here, and it's a singing of a song. People would dress in costume, various costumes and characters, and they would go from house to house, and they would knock on the door, and when the master and mistress would open the door, they would sing this song. And it's a kind of a song with a repeat or a chorus that went around it, a call and a repeat. And it says they beg entry, they're sorry they're disrupting the house, but then they ask for a side of beef 90 feet long for the king's ball. What's even worse, they ask, if they can't get that, they want the eldest daughter, which always would scare the eldest daughter. So they finally, it was tradition to get something for food and drink, and the tradition is called running the Guillenée. This is a picture from in Illinois, a pot of Illinois, La Guillenée. And so you can see they kind of dress up here. They have some outlandish costumes at times. But it's a great tradition. They still do it at Fort de Chartres on New Year's Eve. We do it here, and they do it at Old Mines, I believe. They used to do it at Bloomsdale. I've even found a German Guillenée in Zell, a little German village near us. And at times we've had Girl Scouts run the Guillenée. We have had an African-American Guillenée and a ladies' Guillenée. Our local one finally let ladies in the group. Now we have mostly Germans trying to sing the French song. So this is Dennis Stromat doing La Guillenée. So they come in and they start with the nursing homes and the schools, and then they start hitting the taverns. And they walk in, and so the main guy will start doing some calling, and they got a fiddler or two, and the main guy will sing a verse, and then the other guys will answer it. But you can.
When does this start, Bob? I mean, how early?
Yeah, they start really early. No, they start about 5 or 6 o'clock. They start out of the Legion Hall, and they're going to go to the various places. I think the Bolduc's going to have Dennis Stromat playing for a La Guillenée watch. But it's a great tradition that we have, that we still have here. But La Guillenée does not come without a fight. We had, in the 1880s, we had 2 newspapers, one of which is still in existence. But they had editorial fisticuffs, I call them, between the 2 newspapers. They would argue about anything. And so one time they got into an argument about how the words of the La Guillenée and how to spell it. So we have, I always use the first one with the E with the accent Q, but you have Guillaume, Guillenole, Guillenée, Guillenée, Guilloni, spelled different ways. So you're going to hear it, Guillenée means mistletoe of the year, and so that is one proper way to say it, but it's kind of funny. I've always wanted to do a 2-person play of these 2 editors going at each other, but unfortunately we're missing a lot of answers where they were going back and forth. We don't have all the newspapers. Yeah. So one of the other customs is on the first day of the year, the Jour de l'An, is the Benediction Paternelle, the fatherly blessing, and it was very tradition for the eldest you'd go to the eldest person of the family, and he would give their blessing. And they would come to him, and he'd say, "Now, were you a good little girl this year?" And you'd lie through your teeth and say, "Yes, I was." And he would give his blessing, or the little boys. And that was a very traditional thing, that because the elder were really well respected in the family. The other French custom was called exchange of kisses, and I came across this from a guy named Charles Schultz, who came through here in 1807, and he was here on New Year's Day, and he said they had this rather odd custom that on New Year's Day, the enslaved people would kiss their mistress, and the master would kiss his wenches. And I keep telling my wife we need to resurrect that, and she won't let me have any winches. Well, I haven't found any winches.
Boy.
So there's the New Year's greeting in French is Bonne année, have a good year, and may paradise at the end of the day be your day. So, and the other one is, one of the other customs was Jour l'an étrange, which is children would go to their godparents on New Year's Day and they would get little presents from their godparents, if they were a good girl. One of the other things that I mentioned, the King's Ball, the Bal de Roi. A guy named, an English guy came through here in about 1805, 1806, and he wrote that the principal dances were the minuet, a Spanish dance, the fandango, the pas de deux, and the waltz. We have done the minuet, or we've had people do it at the King's Ball, but the King's Ball was traditionally on Epiphany at the end of 12th night, and we do ours a little bit later. But it's a gathering, and everybody could come to it. One of the guys that wrote about the history of Illinois says, well, they don't indulge in a lot of food. They might have coffee or some bouillon. They eat a lot, and they danced. So one of the things we have, I think they have a King's Ball over in Prairie du Rocher too, and so we have one. Ours is the first Saturday in February, and we have it at the VFW Hall, and we have a band that plays a lot of old songs, and the first thing they do is teach you to do the steps, and then the songs last for about a half an hour, and everybody can really do it by the end of it. But it's a lot of fun, and we have little kids to grandma and grandpa. We bring food, they have wine up there and beer, and so it's a good time, and we select a king by finding a little plastic baby Jesus and a piece of cake. And there's little beans in there, so that's kind of the attendance. And we do a thing in leap year, it's a Queen's Ball. And so this year is coming up in February, we'll have a Queen's Ball, and they pick their king. My wife says if she ever gets the baby Jesus, she's giving it away. But so February 1st, you can see some of the things that we do. Our militia group does an honor guard when we present the old king and queen and the new king and queen. We've had kings from as far away as, I think, Kansas City. We've had people that, one lady got, the story I think shows they couldn't find the lady that had the baby Jesus, so they picked the first lady with a bean, and she was just visiting, and she picked this guy out of random, and they got engaged the next year. We have a false king that I know about, that a guy gave the baby Jesus away to. But this guy wants to be king for life, so it's a real problem. So, you don't have to dress in colonial costume or clothing, but we do encourage it because it's a lot of fun. And little children dance, the adults dance. It's a very good evening. So that was kind of our French history of Christmas. So let's talk about German a little bit. The Germans, we had a few Germans here before 1800. One was Bernard Gipkins, a doctor who supposedly trained in Heidelberg, but he was always suing people to get his money for his treatment. And luckily we had a guy named Francois, his name was Franz Kuhlmann, but the French called him Francois Coman. He was a brewer. He made beer. And he was in our militia in 1779. So, were you descended from the Colemans? Yeah. And that's still a name around here. But then really the Germans, probably about 1800, we had the Bircher brothers that were stonemasons came, and they did work like over at Pierre Menard's house. 1820 we had, oh geez, mine's going blank again. But they ran the Green Tree Tavern as a tobacco shop. And then about 1832, the Germans started coming. And most of the Germans that came here were from the Black Forest, which is down in the southwest corner of Germany. Back then it was the Duchy of Baden, the Duchy of Württemberg, the Duchy of Swabia, and the Duchy of Bavaria, or Bayern. 90% of them were from the Black Forest, and they were from, if you ever look at a map, Offenburg, Germany, to Karlsruhe, up the A5. All those little villages, we had people there. First time I went to Germany, I'm driving up the A5. I didn't know it. I didn't know all of my ancestors came from that area. And I've been back. I've been to all my ancestral villages. So. But the Germans really started coming here in 1832. My first one came then. And by 1880, we were predominantly German here. And in the 1860s, we had an influx of Northern Germans. That's why we have our German church, Lutheran church is our oldest church building. But they were typically Northern Germans. So we're going to talk a little bit about German Christmas. Weihnachten is the German word for Christmas. And the season starts right at Advent, all the way to Heilige Drei Könige, which is the Feast of the Three Kings, Epiphany. And just like the Germans, you have a lot of food, you have a lot of music, legends and customs, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So the Advent wreath, and some churches do this, some people do it in their homes. One of my friends, I was up at their house and they had it, and that's very old. And it's really kind of, you know, with Catholics you have Lent, which is getting ready for Easter, the death of Christ. Advent is getting ready for the coming of Christ, and it's the beginning of our liturgical season. And so typically you have greens or some kind of things that mean different things, as you can see on the bottom, anything from immortality to life and resurrection. But each week you light one of the candles, and you'll see that there's 3 purple candles and then one kind of rose-colored candle. It's kind of a break in the middle of Advent. It's called Gaudete Sunday. And then on Christmas Day you light the white candle in the center for the birth of Christ. That's a very old custom. Some of you, are you all familiar with Advent calendars? Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually the Protestant Christians in Germany started that, and it was again getting ready for the coming of Christ on Christmas. And the first, you know, it's not a real old custom, but they get very cleverly ones. Over in Gegenbach, Germany, a Rathaus is actually a city hall. And I know a few here that might be. Yeah. But they will actually make little things where you open all those little doors or windows to get your different prize for each day of the year. We did it for the kids for a number of years, and my wife's grandmother's church did it. Well, if you remember Père Fouettard with Father Noel, the little guy with the sticks. Mm-hmm. Well, kids in Germany, Father Christmas has a few friends too. Christmas really, St. Nicholas was a bishop in Myra in the early days, and a lot of our customs come from the legend of Bishop Nicholas. There were 3 girls, and they were poor, and they wanted to get married, but they didn't have a dowry. And so they had hung their stockings to dry on the chimney, and St. Nicholas, who was a bishop then, put some coins in their stockings to pay for their dowry. And that's kind of how he became, we get a little bit of the St. Nick thing. But Germany has a variety of little friends that check if you've been naughty or nice. Knecht Rupert is kind of like Père Fouettard. He carries sticks. When I was a kid, I was chastised quite a bit during Advent that I better watch out or I'd get coal or sticks, sometimes both. Sometimes it wasn't warranted. I grew up in a family of 6 boys. Sometimes I didn't do it. I got blamed. I learned how to squeal at an early age. So some of the other ones that you see over there, Belsbach. Now the one that really bothers me is Krampus. That's not German, it's Austrian. And Pelsnickel.
Nice little guy.
Yeah, he's a nice little, he takes you away if you've not been good, so you gotta be good. Another one is Hans Trapp. He's not too good a character, but my favorite is actually not German, it's Dutch. And it's Zwarte Piet, means Black Peter. And the problem with him is if you haven't been good, he takes you to Spain.
Always wanted to go there.
Yeah, well, you've been working at it. No, evidently the Netherlands were ruled by Spain for a while and weren't well liked, so we're going to take you to Spain if you're not good. Some of the, we have similar legends in German. Rivers turn to wine, yes. Animals speak to each other. One of the things, anybody know about the Feast of St. Barbara? It was like 2 or 3 days ago. A tradition is to take a apple branch or a pear or a cherry and you stick it in water on St. Barbara's Day. And if it blooms by Christmas, like if you're a young lady and you want to get married and you want to marry this guy, if it blooms, that's an answer yes. If it dies, you might as well just cut it off. Yeah, yeah. Mountains open up to reveal precious gems. Church bells ring at the bottom of the sea. And one of the other ones is they would drop molten lead into water and look at the shapes. And it was, again, one of those things like, if I want to get married this year, the lead would tell you whether you are or not. So one of the things is the Germans have what's called a Weihnachtskrippe. Krippe is a crib, kind of where we get that word. And the one on the left is the one that I grew up with. And my brother still has it. And he puts it up, and it always has to have a blue light, one of them old blue lights that go out. And he's got the star with the blue light on it. When my dad died, we said before that, we're only going to fight about one thing, an ornament. It's called the ornament. It's a shiny bright indented, and it was the prettiest ornament.
The shiny brights are those indented ones?
Yes.
Those are.
So one year I found a bunch of them in an antique shop, and I was going to send them to all my brothers with a note from Dad that you're my favorite, but I didn't do that. But I do have a shiny bright tree that I bought them on eBay. So, and very traditional, you see the Mary and Joseph and Jesus and the 3 wise men on the left, and so this is what we would get out at Christmas time. You know, Thanksgiving was our favorite holiday because that was the morning we got to pick out the Christmas tree on the farm. So this one on the right is from our church. And if you've been in our church, and I really recommend it, on the right side is the altar of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, where St. Joseph normally is in a Catholic church. But this crutch scene covers up that entire statue. The statues are probably about that high. They're over 100 years old. And my mom, who grew up here in St. James, would bring us over at Christmas time just to see that, because it's really beautiful, and they really do a great job in the church. Well, the other thing is the Weihnachtskrippe Lama, or the Putz Lama. Anybody know what a Putz is? We kind of use that word, but it's really a Pennsylvania Dutch word where you make a little scene, you know, with houses and people and stuff. And one of the things was they would make these little lambs, and the legs almost look like a burnt matchstick, so they're called matchstick legs. This is one my brother has. My grandma my dad said, would make these out of clay and put cotton around them, and matchsticks for lead. Well, my dad and his brother were the 2 youngest in the family, and they were kind of the troublemakers. So Grandma would say at the beginning of Advent, okay, we're going to start in Nazareth. For every day you're good, we're going to get a step closer to Bethlehem. I don't think my dad and my uncle ever got out of Nazareth. So that's still kind of a thing in our family too. So we have Santa Claus. It kind of came from, you know, it comes from different names. St. Nicholas of Myra, we got the St. Nick. Kris Kringle in Germany, the Santa doesn't come that day. He gets a day off. The Christ child comes, and it could be, it's actually like an angel. And Santa Claus, that term comes from the Dutch Sinterklaas. So you've heard about, you know, what was it, about 15 years ago, Target comes out with this upside down tree thing, and everybody was aghast. Well, I got to tell you, that was the original. They would hang up, it was called a paradise tree, or Paradiesbaum, a paradise tree in German. And the first actual Christmas tree is about 1605 in Strasbourg, which was German at the time, because it's right across now Alsace. And they would just decorate it with, you know, like little host and fruit and nuts and that sort of thing. But it was not unusual in those early days to have an upside down tree. And it really means the Trinity, again, this triangle of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Well, in Germany, everybody got really happy about doing Christmas trees. So they'd go out in the forest and they would cut the tops out of trees because they looked really neat, good shape. And it started killing all the trees. So they passed this law that says you couldn't cut down trees, Christmas trees. So the Germans, being industrious, they decided we're going to make our own. So they would take a doll and put some wood things through it, and they would take goose feathers and strip it, paint them or dye them, and then wrap them around the rods, and they're called goose feather trees. And they would bring these to America when they immigrated over here. You can also do it with tinsel. You can do it with boxwood, a variety of things. So it was one of the early environmental movements as to why we do this. Most of the things that I said, most of the things that how we celebrate Christmas in America is really German in origin. Lights on a tree really started with Martin Luther. He was walking home from church on a starry night, and he was walking through the forest with the snow, and he saw these twinkling stars, and he decided to put candles on the trees. And it's in so that's kind of a dangerous condition as the tree gets older. In Germany, they don't put up the tree until on Christmas Eve, and it's in a special room, and you don't get to see it until the next morning. But so lights is a German back thing. Any of you have nutcrackers and smokers, incense smokers that are German, little soldiers and stuff? Ornaments were another German thing, and they were glass blowers in one section of Germany, and they learned how to make those. And something called a pyramid. I put mine up yesterday. It's you have these characters on here and the little veins on there. When you light the candles on the bottom, it makes it turn. And so it's a neat thing. We figured it out, is 42 years old right now. Some of the other Christmas decorations, anybody ever hear the legend of the Christmas spider? I was giving this lecture one day and somebody said, what about the legend of the Christmas spider? Well, it's the story of a poor lady that didn't have anything, who kept a meticulous house, and she went to bed on Christmas Eve and didn't have anything. Santa wasn't going to be able to come the next day, and so that night the spiders came out and went all around their tree and changed it into gold. And so that's kind of how tinsel started with this legend. The first tinsel was made out of lead, kind of tough on the trees. And then later it was done out of tin and other metals. Now you see it in plastics. Garland is to represent trees again. And then the candy cane was originally white. I think the red in there is an American invention, somebody from Indiana. And it really means the blood of Christ. And he's the good shepherd. Some traditional German foods, Hildebrötchen, maybe some of you know, they're called Spitzbuben. It's my favorite German cookie. It's 2 layers. You got a round cookie, and then you got a cookie with a hole in it, and you put lemon curd or raspberry jam in between. Pfeffernusse is a spicy cookie made with a lot of pepper. Dresden Stollen, Christmas Stollen. My mom used to make those. Dresden is a town in Germany that's very famous for that. Lebkuchen is kind of a gingerbready kind of thing, spicy again. And gingerbread houses are called Lebkuchenhaus or Hexenhausle in Germany. Some of you have heard about hexes, I guess like a witch's house. And then one of the local ones is something called Hutzelbrot, and it's a fruit cake. And actually, this was it. Hutzel in German is a dried pear, but you would put raisins and cherries and all kinds of nuts in there, and they used to make it in the bakeries here. It was called, some of them call it Wurzelbrot, just different things, but it's I've got a couple of recipes for it. It takes a few days to make it all. New Year's Eve food, this is something it's very traditional on New Year's or New Year's Eve to eat pork and to eat fish. The Italians had the feast of 11 fishes or whatever. Well, one of the reasons you eat pork and fish is a pig cannot go backwards. And a fish cannot swim backwards. So it's a looking forward kind of thing. In our house on New Year's Eve, we had blood sausage and pickled herring. I moved to Pennsylvania, near the Pennsylvania Dutch, and on New Year's Day, you better have pork and sauerkraut. So I knew, normally we have a party on New Year's Day in the evening, and it's a Schukrut Garni in French, or Schukrut, or Sauerkraut Alsacien in German. But it's sauerkraut potatoes and sausages and smoked meats and stuff. And we always end up drinking schnapps for a while, too, so it's a lot of fun.
Wash it down.
So we'll talk about some of the early Christmas songs in Germany. This one's more in Latin, or you might recognize that, but that's very old, 1328. I'm so glad we got Christmas music. I start playing it right before Thanksgiving. My wife hates it. And, you know, we drove to Atlanta, 9.5 hours of Christmas music.
Oh my God.
So this is Lo how a Rose is Blooming. Er ist ein Rose entsprungen.
Es ist ein Rosensprung aus seiner Wurzel zart, aus uns die
So it's a little more ponderous, I think. This is one, Oh du fröhliche, Oh how joyfully. It's one of my favorite German ones. It's kind of inspiring.
They still
song.
sing it in Latin. I mean, no sanctissima, sanctissima.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We just sang it a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
You have to send me that in the Latin name.
Okay.
Yeah. So the next one is not German, but it's really Austrian, and Franz Gruber, and it's Stille Nacht, Silent Night. And again, this is one of those Christmas Eve things where the organ didn't play in church, and the guy wrote this song, and the guy played it on a guitar. Holy Night. When I hear this one, I think of a little village in Germany in the mountains with snow. Yeah. You'll recognize this one. Now this one was kind of special for me too. If you look down at the bottom, this is from Elizabeth Jogger's songbook from 1894. A friend of mine gave me this, and the songbook is half in English and half in German. And it was from down at River of Oz, which is a little town we call Stobtown also, after the Stobs. So. This is another tradition, Kaveden die Toren, which is on Twelfth Night or Epiphany, where you mark the doors. It's a kind of a Catholic tradition, and it's to start out the new year, and you put the year like 20 plus C plus M plus D plus the year, so it'll be 2020. And it's supposed to symbolize either two things, the three wise men, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar, or the more Latin, Christus Mansionem Benedicat, may Christ bless this house. And there's a ceremony for blessing the chalk and going out to market. They still do it in the schools here, the Catholic schools. I'm trying to get Father to have on Epiphany a chalk blessing session, because I'd like to resurrect that around town too, because that was a very good tradition. Some that we're not really sure of whether they're French or German, is the Christmas stocking, and it goes back to that St. Nicholas, and remember the three girls and their stockings hung by the thing. And it also is the gold coins at Christmas, and that goes back again to St. Nicholas and Myra. In the Jewish faith, they have Hanukkah gelt. And my doctor is Jewish from St. Louis, and I give him Hanukkah gelt every year, and he's thrilled. Except it's not exactly Jewish. It's like you can't buy Jewish gelt locally. One of the unusual American customs, neither French nor German, is called turning out the schoolmaster. We had lots of one-room schoolhouses here. And in fact, as late as 1930s, we had 52 one-room schoolhouses in our county. In 1940, 75% of the kids that didn't go to the Catholic school went to one-room schoolhouses. So when it came to be Christmas time, what you would do, the students would do to get a vacation, they would lock out the teacher. It's called turning out the schoolmaster. And there's actually, one guy wrote about 100 miles from St. Genevieve, this one teacher decided, well, he was going to do something a little different. So instead of getting locked out, he brought some cherry bounce with him. And bounce is a liquor. And both the teacher and the kids got, as somebody wrote, awfully sick. And the teacher got fired. So kids, don't try turning out your school teacher. They have rules against that now. Some traditions that are neither French nor German, the Christmas pickle, that's not something you see in Germany. They do sell them now because my pickle's from Germany. But that's where the goal is to find the pickle on the tree. And but that's a more, I think, an American invention. It's kind of like fortune cookies are not Chinese, they're American.
If you find it, you get a prize, is that it? The pickles?
An extra year, maybe.
Now, see, in our family, it was like I made ornaments for both of my boys, and I had their picture on them, so I'd put them in the front of the tree. Well, pretty soon one of them would be in the back of the tree. Then the other one would come in, and they'd switch. The ornament was hanging on my dad's cedar tree one year, and so I put a little sticky note on it, "Too bad, love, Dad." Pretty soon, the sticky note's on a bagworm on the on the tree. So the other thing that's not German is Christmas cards. That's more British. Actually, Queen Victoria really increased the use of the things about Christmas. She was related to the German ruling class, and she brought Christmas trees and that sort of thing to Britain. So that's the lecture. Joyeux Noël, et bonne année, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year in French, or Frohe Weihnachten und ein gutes neues Jahr. Any questions?
This is probably this question everybody else knows, but I don't. Why did so many Germans come over during that time?
People ask me that, and again, most of them were from Southwest Germany. We'd had a period of a lot of wars in that area. There had been about 20, 30 years of famine, and so they started coming for a better life. They came here because if you've ever been to the Black Forest, there's the mountains on both sides, and you have this big alluvial plain with the Rhine River running through it. Kind of looks like here. And so they felt very comfortable. Most of them came up from New Orleans, though we see them coming into New York, to Buffalo, New York, to in the Ohios, and then here both ways. But it was really changed the town from the German migration. But they came here, actually I think my last ancestor, my namesake was Mueller, and I think they came here to get married. Because I was doing my genealogy and I find out that my great-grandmother was illegitimate, my great-grandfather was illegitimate, her mother was illegitimate, and I'm going, whoa. And then my aunt, who's a 95-year-old nun, told me she was a lady of ill repute, and I went, so I was talking to a lady in Germany that was American in the area, and she said they had passed a law that said you could not get married if you didn't have a dowry. They were trying to prevent the procreation of poor people. Well, it doesn't take much to have the child. It takes a little bit more afterwards. So my great-grandparents came over on the same ship. I have the visa. They're both listed there, and within a month of being in America, they got married. So there was a variety of reasons. The last ancestor came to avoid the draft. So, but it's, I mean, we have a great tradition here. I mean, I'm a German by background, and I grew up with German foods and all of that, but the combination of the French here and the German and then the Spanish time period, it's a wonderful place to do research. Our church records go back to 1759, our civil records 1757. They're all in French or Spanish, which is difficult, but it's getting better. So,
Awesome.
one last German song.
Well, my mom and dad, they got married in 47. They had a band, and they used to play at all these little places. And after they were married, I don't know if this is before I was born or when, but my mom.
You were born before they were married, or?
No, 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 no. This occurred. This occurred before or after I was born, is what I mean. There was, it was New Year's Eve night, and she said all of a sudden she heard all this commotion, and she goes, my dad started laughing, he goes, oh hell, it's the Guione people, just sit down and relax. And she didn't have any idea what it was,
Yeah.
even though she was probably as much French as he was. But they had moved out, and dad had stayed in the old mines area, so he knew exactly what was
Yeah.
going on. And that's in the 50s.
Well, in 1850, they banned the DNA because it was getting too rowdy.
Funny.
And I actually found the city ordinance that banned the Guiana and also banned sherry berries, which is
What year was it?
1850.
1850.
They banned sherry berry, which is we call a chivalry, and trick track, which is some little wooden knockers, noise makers.
Little things you go back to.
And so they banned all of that. Well, a couple of years later, the boys decided we're running the Guiana. So they get thrown in jail, and John Scott, who was our U.S. congressman when we became a state, was the lawyer. And they had a big court trial, and he gets them off. And they all go to the tavern and start drinking afterwards. But yeah, it's really kind of interesting. There, down in Louisiana, there's a place called Mamou, and it's north of Lafayette. But they have something called Courrier de Mardi Gras, running the Mardi Gras. And they do it on horseback, and they dress in costumes, a lot of bird-looking kind of things. They have a lot of libations, and they go to a house, and they sing a song. It's not like our La Guiana, it's a little bit different. And then the owner throws a chicken into the air, and these guys have to get off the horse and go catch the chicken for the gumbo. But I found it a live chicken. I've seen them slide through the mud and stuff. You can, if you look up Courrier de Mardi Gras on the YouTube, you can see some wonderful things. But I found it interesting that the custom of, we call it running the Guiana here, they have running the Mardi Gras down there. So a lot of
Making quests all over the world, and it's kind of the same thing, dress up. And
dress up and have party, drink a little beer. Yeah, let's go.
whatever excuse you need.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you for coming.
I enjoyed that.